Master Willem, I've come to review the prospecting schedule. Lawrence peeked into the provost's office, where he found him standing in front of a board with what looked like a replica of the labyrinth made of various notes and sketches, compiling a form of stitched map. By no means was it an accurate one, but he discerned familiar section patterns and large imagery of what had been found there. Rough drawings of the marked pathways dominated the center of the board that grew into ambiguous borders. The most elusive and bothersome trait of the labyrinth was that it seemed to grow as they explored it. It never truly ended. Willem looked a bit disheveled where he stood. He had rolled up the sleeves of his shirt and his hair was unkempt. Lawrence examined the scene before announcing himself once more, with a chuckle. "Am I interrupting something?" Willem slowly turned towards him, tore with much effort his eyes from the board, and replied hastily. "Not at all. I was just finished. Take a seat. I have some news." Hesitantly, Lawrence approached the seat, wondering if there should be anything to worry about. "Gehrman's recruits are ready, I understand," Willem stated, with firm purpose both in eyes and tone. "Yes, they are." Lawrence narrowed his eyes as he tried to put together what the provost was up to. Willem's firm finger pointed onto the drawing of a chalice with a few notes attached. "You are going to open this one." It was a demand, one that he likely was so adamant on that plans had already been made. "We will do it as soon as possible. I will lead the expedition." The surprise lay not in the fact that the provost wanted to take physical charge for once, but in the fact that he was so firm on doing so with a completely unexplored depth. Lawrence himself was used to the elusive nature of the unknown. Many times had it gone awry, and many others had luck seemingly been with them. But opening a new chalice was always a bit special. Every time they had done so, they had always been ill prepared. A surprise was a guarantee in a new part, and now the provost himself was to brave the unknown. "You are aware that most incidents occur the first time entering a new chalice?" "Yes." He seemed almost humiliated by the question. "I am the one overseeing the operation, after all. I'm well aware of the statistics." "But why now? If you don't mind my asking, what is it that you've discovered?" He indicated towards the board. "I have reasons to believe that somewhere in this area there is something the Pthumerians treasured, or at least kept in high regards. With what has been gathered, I have concluded that there are certain chambers that share some significance, but there have never appeared any layouts nor writings detailing their location. Until now. He fell silent after the explanation. Lawrence was not entirely satisfied by his reasoning. I understand. It's quite the experience to be one of the first to discover something grand. I can tell you that much. And who am I to deprive you of such an occasion? I'm just worried. And German will be even more so. Willem's expression grew more softer. I am aware. I knew the opposition would be about my safety. He sat down behind the desk, slouching down and nearly ready to fall asleep by the looks of it. But I am not as young anymore, and I have yet to taste the feeling you risk your young lives for. I need to be there when we find whatever lies within that chamber. You don't need to convince me, Willem. I know how much this all means to you. But you will have to take the debate with everyone else. I won't take the scolding simply for delivering the news. In the forest, where the protectors regularly trained to maintain and surpass their skills, Lawrence had found some strange attraction. It could be the admiration for their art, seeing them run and fight, improving their bodies through hard work and persistence. With many yet training within the labyrinth, the old gauntlet was almost like a playground in contrast to the grim underground for the protectors. But Lawrence considered himself a poor athlete. He lacked the same will as they did, though knowing he had a different willpower brought him comfort. Thus, it was easy to admire them from a distance without envy. It was even quite inspiring. Besides, he had always had German who leaned more into that direction. Perhaps that's why there was no spite or self-loathing that he could be better. He had always had it in his life all along, vicariously through his friend. Thoughts of such nature would run past in his mind, much like how the new recruits would, while he sat at the course. His sentimentality would blur his thoughts and often spirit him away from work. Then something blurred past, snatching the pen he was holding, causing his mind to be wrought with confusion. He barely was able to react. He simply looked down at his empty hand with a pondering expression. He searched about, retaining the same dumbfounded face as he tried to locate whatever had disarmed him. Nothing particularly struck him as guilty. Two recruits had stopped a ways from him, with their heads turned in his direction. They were both in a possession of a mixed astonished and amused expression. Even Shepard had stopped and looked upwards, shaking his head in a sympathetic manner. It only added to the absurdity of the event, and his forehead grew wrinkled from bothered pondering. German suddenly emerged from thin air, briefly surrounded by a faint cloud of smoke. He extended his hand with the stolen pencil, smiling childishly. That stupid trick of yours. Of course you would turn something so impressive into this annoyance. He snatched back the pen as the resistance to hold back a smile failed. I'm an impressively annoying man sometimes. German sat himself down on the plank next to him and gave the two onlookers a menacing gaze, which had them promptly resume their training. You here on business or leisure? It's mostly both when I'm here. I'm making a supply list for the tomb trip, in addition to some news for you. They watched on as one hunted the other through the course. Willem will be joining us for this one. German sighed and muttered. Right. And he insisted, knowing it's a first? With all the risks, yes. Then it was probably him that wanted this one prioritized, right? He nodded, and German shook his head. Does he even know how truly blind we will be? Will he not even allow scouts in before him? Hey, take it up with him. I'm sure it will go fine. Your lads have handled much already. German's eyes tracked the protectors passing before losing him beyond the shrubbery. I am not so sure. It is frustrating enough to anticipate the threat. But if you had not noticed, each news section brought its new shares of dangers. Things we have always been ill-prepared for. Lawrence filled in the last paragraph and closed the book. It's not his first trip. He knows what it's like. Yes, but I can't help but feel that the stakes are higher. Is there more to say? Why is he insisting so? Vague to the reasons mostly. He strongly suspects that there will be something in that area. Something the Pthumerians valued greatly. He paused and tried to discern what German was thinking. This one means a lot to him. Well, no one has any say in the matter. But nevertheless, I suspect the lads will be on edge. German's eyes wandered off and was caught by something beyond. His expression turned playful again, and before Lawrence knew it, only fading smoke remained at his side. He looked forward towards the spot that had caught his attention. Maria and Luna had emerged from the woods. He just about managed to make out Maria's figure before she, like German, vanished into a similar foggy manner. She set off after him, who had made his escape into the gauntlet. To watch those two run was a sight indeed. They had become masters of their own art in their own time, and no one was their equal. They stormed through the obstacles, forcing other practitioners to abandon it and jump out of their way. Those that could not react fast enough were enveloped and left confused by the two clouds that blew past them, thinking that they might have caught a glimpse of a person within. Seeing them hunt one another brought pause to Luna, who remained standing where Maria had left her, but soon joined Lawrence. My, I actually cannot keep track of them. And who is chasing who at this point? It is truly astonishing. I can't figure out how they do it. But then again, they give such a poor explanation each time, like they don't even know themselves. She giggled. Have you spoken with Master Willem? Yes, I have. She had likely just learned of the news, but shared a little of his own skepsis, judging by her cheery tone of voice. Aren't you excited? She eagerly asked. Now that some time had passed, he could re-evaluate the situation. Yes, I can feel this one is going to be something special. Lawrence turned his head up from his ledger, taking notes so everything was accounted for. As he looked up again, he spotted Willem just arriving. He had bothered to dress up in his finest for the occasion. It was odd, seeing how he never cared for fashion on previous ventures. Osmond halted his approach, and he overheard a comment being placed about dressing more appropriately, to which Willem snarkily responded that he would have to wear something after all. He strode past Osmond and strutted up to Lawrence.
Are we ready?
Yes, everything seems to be in order. He skimmed through the entirety of his list once more. This group would be the largest to ever enter the labyrinth, and it was clearly visible on the people crowding around the shrine. He had never taken into account that mysterious aspect that had Willem so determined would take its effect upon everyone else. Evidently, the provost had only let slip as much as Lawrence already knew, rendering every other, down to the last member of the institution, share in his anticipation. Would the expedition, based mostly on an irregularity, turn out to be a marvelous farce or a maddening success? Willem remained by his side, having seemingly judged him hesitant to deliver a clear answer. Yes, we can begin. He nodded and walked towards the altar. The act alone made many fall silent and grant him their attention. He stopped and turned towards the gathering, by which point everyone anticipated the inception. Now, pay attention. This will be the structure to which we will obey. We are quite many, and justly so. When we enter, we will divide into 3 groups. These groups will take different directions, and when they have covered their areas, they are to wait until further objectives are shared. Lawrence shot a glance at German, leaning against the wall, whose head he saw far behind everyone, and with an expression mostly hidden in the murky room. The plan is dependent on finding the lever. If it is not to be found, we will still reconvene before the lantern holders. But no one is to enter until we have a full overview of the whole section. There are plenty of analysis to be done, as always. So when a team is not exploring, they will establish themselves a base and inform the others. In addition, we must always be informed about each other's location. The coordinators of the teams will be as follows. Myself and Lawrence, with German, will make up the first group. Luna and Doris, with Maria in the second, and lastly, Osmond and Valar with Vitus in the third. Gather up those of you I called out to form the teams, and the rest of you will take place where you are needed. Each group should have at least 2 samplers, 2 interpreters, 2 scribes, 1 doctor, and if possible, an even number of protectors as scholars. The mass scattered, following the positionings of the characters listed. German walked over to them, and they stood close to Willem by the altar. He made himself particularly visible for the ensuing walkabout. In a murmured chaos, the students and masters shuffled over to different groups. With the amount of people, each group immediately filled the superfluous requirement with additional personnel of other specializations. When all seemed set in their placement, Willem spoke up again. Team 1 goes in first. Remember to wait at least 5 minutes after the final one has entered before starting with the next team. As usual, when you have entered you will quickly move out of the way. Be observant for larger inventory that might require assistance to be moved before leaving the entrance. He gestured towards his own gathering to move up to the shrine with him. And remember, the large equipment will take more people to enter with it. Be wary, be observant, and above all, be brave in the face of the unknown. He knelt down at the shrine where the chalice rested and reached out with his hand towards it, and the closer he came to physically touch it, the fainter his visage became. In the same moment his index finger reached the golden surface, he vanished completely. Lawrence turned to German, gave him a nod and proceeded to face the rest of the team. Take turns as you enter. Scholar then Protector. Ready heavy loads now as 2 will be required. He turned just as German kneeled down and repeated the gesture. He too vanished in the same fashion. In his mind, Lawrence began counting to 10. Once he had completed the requirement, he slumped down before the altar. When his hand extended, everything around him was enveloped by a hazy fog. His fingers never reached the decorative surface. Instead, his hand grew slightly colder. The colder and suppressed aura of the labyrinth approached him in the cloud, like the ground beneath him had animated and carried him forward into a different room. The mysterious murkiness settled, and he was greeted with the small candles that lit up the antechamber. He got to his feet and moved out of the way. A moment passed. The fog appeared where he once emerged. One of the young new protectors arose from the mist. He nodded to him before Lawrence moved further inside to the neighboring hall. German stood with a lit torch, peering over a ledge. The room appeared circular, but of the scale that its entirety was not perceivable. To his left began a descending stair that curved along the wall. To the right, the floor continued to follow the curvature of the room, ending where one of those barred doors was located, predictably guarded by a woman of the Pthumerian stone. Willem had leaned against the wall, as he had a tendency to become terribly nauseous by the arcane transportation. I admire your ability to handle these. Rather, he stammered while clambering after his bearings. I'll head downstairs. See about the situation. German turned away to head towards the descent. As he did, the young protector walked inside. German cocked his head towards the stair, relaying his intentions, and he followed him down. The entrance chamber was by now perpetually clouded in grey smoke, as they entered with such intervals that it never got the chance to fully settle. As he was admiring the occurrence, Carol stepped out with a heavy satchel slung over her shoulder, hanging at her side. "Everything is as it should be?" She was hesitant to walk through the archway and only peeked over his shoulder. "Fine. They are just scouting below." He walked over to the edge, and much like German had before, leaned cautiously over. He saw the two protectors searching about the lower part. The dark was utterly compact, and the torchlight was not wholly able to illuminate the entirety of the surroundings. But they seemed relaxed enough. German looked up and saw him and waved for him to come down. "It's clear." Millard appeared through the smoke and was now dragging a smaller cart, holding emergency supplies that just barely was the acceptable width of the entry. Behind it walked Frederick. Lawrence approached them with wide, guiding gestures. "Oh, this might prove arduous." He glanced at the stair. Millard turned to look while doggedly struggling to quickly get the cart out of the way. Upon seeing that they would have to efficiently send it down the steps, he closed his eyes with brief resignation, then nodded. "We'll just have to unpack it up here. Come on." He waved with his fingers for Frederick to move after him as he guided the cart in place along the widely curved wall. Lawrence grabbed a basket filled to the brim with poultice canisters and vials of spirit and headed down the steps. Down below he firstly noticed an obelisk of funerary qualities placed in the center of the floor. Lined around and pointed towards it were stone slabs resembling coffin lids. A single wide arched pathway led deeper into the labyrinth. Light began igniting upstairs, and low voices indicated the majority of their party was coming into position. Soon enough, person after person began descending the stairway with a variation of supplies in hand, some of which were quick to begin organizing tables and stockpiles to hold the said supplies. Eventually the last protector walked down to them, and Willem took the word. "Very good. Beyond lies a crossing. We'll take the east path and explore it to its fullest. Some will remain here to continue with the preparations." The group made ready with their individual tools and material assets. German moved to the front with 4 other guards. Their team consisted of a massive 14 characters, a whole lot more than what was preferred for the commonly narrow corridors of the labyrinth. Thus the scholars were divided up and surrounded by protectors, as they all formed a wide line to enter the darkness. It was, in fact, slightly more unnerving being in a grander group, due to the threat of mass disorientation. Had it only been him and 1 or 2 capable protectors, he might have felt more safe. They departed, leaving some within the chamber to continue the organizing. They made their way through the wide corridor and turned right, eventually landing them into a chamber that was lit with a chandelier and candles adorning the walls and the pillars. German put his finger over his mouth and signaled for 2 others to follow him in. Lawrence peeked inside and saw one of them climbing up a ladder to wooden platforms higher up in the square chamber. German disregarded the use of ladders as he leapt upward into a fog, to which it was impossible to discern by sound if he had landed up above them on the platform. After a moment's passing, their bones collectively rattled in fear as the most inhuman of shrieks echoed around them. For good or ill, he could not see the terrifying scuffle that transpired right above his head. Merely 2 protectors had made their ascent up the ladder in addition to German, and they were now the sole beholders of the screaming source. Others began to shove their way to the front and into the chamber to hastily climb up as gunfire and the swinging of blades accompanied the abhorrent sound. German and his lads were known to strike quickly and could surprise anyone, but to the spectators' own surprise, one of the protectors came falling down onto the cold, hard stone floor, landing in front of their feet. Another, encouraged by the sight of his comrade, flew past him to partake in the rumble above. All while that awful scream continued. The field doctor quickly rushed to kneel beside the groaning protector and examined him.
Where does it hurt?
She firmly asked, having to nearly shout to overcome the volume of the scream.
My arm. His arm is broken. Hand me a brace.
The deafening turmoil came to a sudden stop as the screaming faded out into a gurgled groan. It had been so loud and constant that with its absence, Lawrence thought still to hear a disembodied replica beyond the walls echoing. The fallen man managed to sit up, appearing more startled by the fall than hurt by it.
What happened?
The doctor asked. The man shook his head and winced as his arm was undergoing the provisional treatment.
There was a door that we saw. To our left. Someone came rushing at us. The fastest thing I've encountered down here, and it kicked me over. Just like that.
He spoke soberly, but with an expression conveying sheer astonishment. The other fighters came down from the platforms to join their wounded partner. German's frantic expression was washed away as soon as he saw him sitting up straight. He walked up to him and gave him a hard pat on the back.
Stronger than it looked, eh?
The man gave a strained smile.
Yeah. It didn't seem very happy about seeing us.
No, it did not. Can you continue?
He stood up to meet his master's level.
I'll just have to do without a firearm.
German patted him on his still functioning shoulder.
For your own good, I'll suggest you head back. Get that arm in order and protect the base.
Willem approached the two.
You are very brave, lad, risking all you got for us. It reminds me of something my old teacher used to say. Evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race.
Lawrence screwed the last table leg into place, stood up and flipped it over. Carrill instantly appeared to occupy the space with a container of scribing supplies. He overviewed the room where their temporary station had just been established to better analyze both a significant mural and the deceased carcass of a significant labyrinth dweller, as well as hoarding other local and common treasures such as small tools, fabric and mysterious growth samples. While searching for anything else that needed to be assembled, one of the protectors from another of the exploring ventures showed up in the doorway, searched the chamber until she located German. Lawrence scented news from the other teams, and approached the two of them.
Our group is set up in the westernmost chamber. We have mapped out the adjacent halls and are just getting to work with what is found there.
What is the word from the other group?
Nothing yet, Master, but they headed into the northern corridor smoothly last I heard.
German called out and pointed to a protector, gesturing for him to come over.
You two will go ahead and find Group 3 and assess their situation. Take another with you if you feel the need, and inform Maria on your way out.
They nodded and set off on their way, grabbing the first shoulder of another protector as they left to accompany them. German turned to Lawrence.
There is another chamber up ahead. I feel there could be trouble waiting. But I'm not completely comfortable with taking the lads away from here. What do you say? Should we scout ahead or wait a bit?
Lawrence gestured for him to follow as he turned back towards the slab table where he kept his ledger. I think we should wait for the information and adjust ourselves entirely. You should pull reinforcements from the others, so you have as many as you need. If you are able to, of course.
Right, I will do so.
He flashed a concerned smile, turned and reunited with his own peers. Willem had in the meantime joined Carol in preparing to copy the large wall with paper, coal, ink and other interpretive tools in the form of books and stencils. Currently, she was hard at work writing into a tiny handbook, as Willem mostly observed. As he seemingly was not needed elsewhere, Lawrence approached curiously. Willem turned up before he had fully reached them and was quick to have his attention return to her drawings.
She is showing me what these different symbols represent. As you may have noted, there are some new additions here we can add to our compendiums.
See, here, Lawrence.
She showed him a page that at first glance was like a beautiful interpretive painting, mostly due to how closely she had illustrated each individual symbol to his estimate. While he had the urge to comment on it, he was captivated by the sight, as he discovered that a common trait with the formula of iconography was that smaller symbols always made out the structure of larger symbols. And of the larger symbols, many were very similar to some of those that was embedded in its structure.
You see, they have a clever way of writing. It's like solving a puzzle. Or, I suppose every language is like so.
The marvel, as indicated on this mural, is that the old ones wrote in much more than just conventional meanings, as you see on how a large rune replicates a smaller. Just take a look at the wall, my friend.
Lawrence did so, and much like how it was to peer into Carol's notes, the piece in its entirety was a detailed masterpiece. The more he looked, the more individual parts he thought to see, and he unknowingly walked closer. But upon doing so, Willem gently tugged his shoulders and withdrew him.
See not each detail, see the whole.
Upon the encouragement, it was as if something lit up in his mind, causing him to see what he was supposed to, what had been there all along. The entirety of the mural's shape was a rune of its own, a simple shape where all the intricate little parts made foundation to a pattern on the rectangular wall in the form of several crosses overlapping each other in a line. When he once more desired to move closer, he was allowed to do so, and Willem followed behind.
See if you can find it in there.
I can. Here. And here. Several copies of the large shape were found within, albeit still fairly sizable, that in a beautiful crafted composition flowed together with many other familiar symbols, but also many of yet mysterious origin. And even within them did the process repeat itself, down to the most miniature of levels. So small that he felt it most proper to examine them with a magnifying glass, to make sure that they too did not consist of even smaller foundations of the same runes.
What this means I cannot yet say. It is an entirely unique scripture, unparalleled with any other culture of civilization. Evidently, they did not utilize letters as our modern alphabet does. I gather it will take some time to translate the piece, but a context will surely illuminate much of our efforts.
Willem! Master Willem!
Two of the protectors had entered into the hall, and in a light run came up to the provost.
Team 3 has just finished mapping their section. Vitus and his lads had just ridden the place of creatures when we arrived, and they just found the lever.
So entry to the grand hall is open then?
A profound look appeared on his face. A look that appeared greedy, or one of the deep yearning of a starved man. That's good. Then we are on course, Lawrence replied to the woman, giving a curious glance at Willem's reaction. A report back to German. He asked for more bodies to scout the chamber up ahead. They gave him an affirmative nod, then proceeded to make way to their master. Willem had turned to Carol's drawings. His eyes nearly bulged from his head as they fanatically scanned its surface.
Lawrence, Carol, I know none of you are particularly religious. Thus, I believe you have not yet fully grasped the state of my own belief.
She put down her pen and sat straight up on her simple stool. He seemed disturbed, wild at mind. Everything about him conveyed extreme suspense to the point of sickness.
Is there something bothering you, Master Willem?
Carol gingerly asked. His face was unmoved.
The gods. It is the gods. Their true form rests here. Or was here. The signs tells me so. Do they not, Carol?
His head snapped towards her, almost menacingly. She sank slightly in her seat.
I cannot be sure.
I can. I am sure. That was their greatest treasure. Look at the material things they so carelessly have strewn about the place. The real importance was their contact with the higher beings. That's why we discover such morbid objects kept so ceremoniously.
Lawrence had to search his mind after what he meant. He had not discovered such himself, but knew that rather conspicuous finds mostly were in the nature of preserved remains, of unknown Pthumerians. Some remains even appeared as different beings entirely, but were in their current state mere skeletons. Curiously, when one entered a chamber loaded with golden objects and valuable craftsmanship, what one would find the most preciously guarded in chests resting on glorified altars was, as Willem said, not anything of material worth, but that of severed limbs or other bodily contents. Initially, it all appeared as the tomb of kings or realities, but over time a new impression had been formed, that it was perhaps these remains that was the real treasure.
And now that we are about to uncover what such a race considered a treasure, I will finally know what it is I've been searching for. We all will.
He abruptly turned and walked away, beads of sweat having begun crawling their way down his forehead.
What are you thinking of, Florence?
Caril tilted her head and searched for his gaze. He returned it and smiled a bit awkwardly. I have never seen him like that. I never knew it meant that much. She gave him a little smile and nudged his arm.
Every great discovery or revelation starts with a desire. Without him, we would not be here, no matter how strange it could be.
They must have been standing around longer than what was felt. Suddenly, commotion broke out. German and Shepard came storming in with an unconscious fellow. After them limped another, supported by her compatriots. The scholars immediately flew into action to make room on a table and made ready with their medical tools. German had a pale and apathetic expression as he carried his apprentice. As they put the man down, Lawrence and Caril moved up behind their friend. Two doctors immediately got to work with the man on the table. German stiffly turned around and walked past them both, towards the other protector with a bloody leg. She was seated, eyes red from tears. The one that supported her tore up her pant leg to address the large and bleeding wound.
He lives, but he can't stay here,
he informed her coldly.
If we can, we will move him up above to be treated properly.
He was cut off by the scream of the man on the table. The doctor's treatment had woken him from his forced slumber. The woman tried to stand, but failed. Unable to support herself, she fell onto German. He caught her and embraced her tightly.
It's all right. He will live. He will be fine. As soon as he gets out, everything will be fine. It's all right.
German repeated reassuringly, but emotionlessly, to the weeping woman, who wanted nothing more than to see the man on the table. Lawrence detected just a hint of nervousness underlying German's tone. Something only he could hear, after all this time knowing him. When she calmed down and the man fell into unconsciousness again, he sat her down and walked back to the doctors. Lawrence approached with him. One of them removed their bloody gloves.
He has 3 completely shattered ribs, and his shoulder was dislocated. The shoulder is in place now, but we can do little more for the torso.
The man breathed strained and irregular in his uneasy sleep as he lay in front of them. "Are the lungs damaged?" Lawrence inquired.
"We believe so. I'm sorry, but down here, I don't know what more I can do for him."
German continued to look absent.
A watcher bashed him with a club to the chest, and he flew into a wall.
He said, almost as a whisper.
"The chamber is safe. We encountered Vitus, who remains there currently."
He appeared indifferent to the situation and walked to the other protectors. Never before had he seen his friend like that, but he had to keep up an appearance, lest despair fall over the others of his wards. Nevertheless, he followed German. As he was about to say something encouraging to him, German looked back at him. His gaze appeared strong, but softened considerably as his eyes gazed past Lawrence. He turned to see where the gaze had wandered, to find the woman with the damaged leg. He looked back at him, who still kept his eyes at her.
"Now, after the fact," he began fleetingly, "a lie seems much more horrible."
Back in the round chamber, now fully lit up and fully converted into a workplace, the entirety of the second team had already assembled. Maria immediately noticed something was wrong just by looking at them collectively entering into the space, and gave Lawrence a look. He in turn glanced over at German, slightly shaking his head. She quickly went over to him, passing Lawrence and Willem as they approached Luna and Doris, standing slouched over a table. "You seem to be in good condition? Everything worked out well?" he asked. Luna remained focused on the papers in front of her as she replied.
"Well, it has not been the smoothest of trips."
Her black hair, commonly kept tied behind her head, had in parts started to come loose from the bow. Dark strands hung over her green eyes that made good efforts not to look directly into the face of another.
"We did discover some new objects that seem to indicate a possible subculture of the Pthumerians, but it's mostly a lead, nothing definitive yet."
She turned up from the documents she was organizing.
How about you?"
Not the easiest venture either.
Would that subculture perhaps tell us more of what to expect ahead?
Willem laid both hands on the table. Dora's face crumpled up in considerable doubt.
Not in my opinion. It was but a reference out of the ordinary, and our best gander was a secondary culture.
The provost began tapping his fingers on the wood and casting his eyes around the room.
Very well. It was not important. There surely will be something extraordinary beyond. Might you humor me with your guesses?
I cannot, for there are none. But I can assure you that on this day, our work will change. Doris smilingly shook his head at Willem's adamancy. Lawrence knew it to be familiar with German's own visionary instincts. Highly doubtable, but was with the utmost guarantee to be proven true in some form.
Has something happened?" German does not seem to look so keen.
Luna asked, looking at the gathering of protectors gathered around the gloomy conversation he and Maria was engaged in. One of them was wounded when they secured the chamber. It was rather dire. Lauren's own worry must have been plain to see.
Oh dear. Poor German.
After a time of eventless idling, would the rumbling of footsteps approach from the wide corridor? Willem had turned more and more impatient, and as soon as he saw Osmond's bald head behind the protector's shoulders, he rushed up, proclaiming his inquiry. The group assimilated with the assembled people. Carol and Millard came up to them, where they had remained at a table, right by the foot of the winding stair.
Hello, Luna. Master Doris. How was your expedition?
Luna pulled back her scarf with a grin and revealed a golden medallion with a red gem shaped like a crescent moon.
Horrible, but not entirely without its spoons.
She then proceeded to reach into her satchel hung around her shoulder.
And I found this little thing for you.
Carol received a golden ring with a yellow stone with a smoky pattern in it.
Oh, it's very pretty. But should we take them for ourselves? Well, it's an archaeological find I am giving to you for examination.
Luna winked.
That one got me thinking of you, so I thought it would fit.
Carol looked around. When Doris gave no remarkable reaction, despite having observed the dubious exchange, she smiled and placed it on her ring finger.
It's very pretty.
Millard leaned in closer to examine it. Carol blushed. Willem suddenly appeared over her shoulder.
We are ready. Gammon is heading up now. Come with me, all of you.
He departed up the stairs. People, mostly protectors, began ascending while many still remained, absorbed with whatever else they had managed to dig up from the bygone world. Luna looked after him as he left, and hastily assembled her most necessary tools for observing the Pthumerian nature.
Right then. Dare wager he is right?
Right about what? Not even he knows what lies beyond. She giggled, and they both proceeded to walk up the steps. The barred gate had already been opened, with Vitus standing outside, watching over all that entered. Beyond lay a wide and high corridor with statues standing inside alcoves, evenly positioned along the walls. Red banners with golden lining hung in a somewhat tattered state. Candles mainly illuminated the entire space with a cold light. At the far end stood a gathering of scholars and protectors around German and Maria, who was preparing to push open a giant double door. Everything about the surroundings was intricately made, from the finely carved masonry to the antiquely ornamental candelabras, all having largely withstood the test of time. When they had joined the troop, Maria looked back and gave German a nod. The two of them began to push on each side of the gate, slowly and loudly scraping it open over the stone, sending echoes through the air. The chamber inside was large and circular. At the end, faced towards the door, a figure stood. It was so tall that Lawrence had no trouble seeing him from behind the shoulders of those in front of him. He had long grey hair, pale features, and his mouth hung open. There seemed to be nothing in his dark eyes as he stared at them. Only two black spheres that oddly appeared to brim with darkness. The ancient old man was draped in golden garbs and a flowing bright red cape with a large feathery collar. His hunched figure was supported with a cane while holding a long staff in the other hand, on which a little flame burned at the tip. Behind him was a group of fat watchers. They all were still as statues, only watching. The protectors were used to aggressive greetings, so they were halted by the surprising sight. Willem was one of the first inside, right after German and Maria. Seeing how he slowly moved further inside made Lawrence incredibly nervous, and he began shoving his way after him. The larger group had stayed behind, and so it was the two master protectors, Willem and Lawrence, who were in the front, staring down from across the room, the very first inhabitants of the labyrinth that had ever taken a moment to observe their uninvited guests. Willem gave no hesitation and continued past the both protectors, albeit precariously.
"Stop! Willem, for God's sake!"
Lawrence hissed in a subdued scream. Maria tried to grab his arm, but he waved it off. Afraid that a sudden move would antagonize them, the protectors stalked the provost, walking towards the seemingly cooperative elder. Before the bizarre circumstance had fully taken root, he had managed to come so close that only a few feet separated him and the Pthumerian elder, who was quite taller than the provost. They stared silently at each other, and the tension was in the roof. It seemed, from where Lawrence was standing, that Willem was quietly communicating with the elder, judging by their stillness and both staring right at the other. Then the garbed old man slowly lowered his staff with a fiery tip towards Willem. Flame arose and a wall of fire erupted from the tip, right into Willem's face. He stumbled back with his hand covering the burns. He was quiet at first, only muttered and groaned, but as the distance grew between him and the passive elder, the pain overcame him and he began to scream, moving frantically and covering his face until he eventually fell backwards. The protectors had started moving as soon as the fire lit up the room. German, in an impressive leap, had transformed his blade and aimed a blow for the elder. But with a tap to the ground with the cane, the elder had disappeared and emerged behind the watchers. One by one, the protectors flew past Lawrence with silent elegance towards the battle. Weapons transformed, and the booming sounds of firearms echoed around the hall. The watchers cruelly retaliated with great crushing force. Stillness had abandoned them, and chaos ensued, a dance of the fast and dexterous bodies of the protectors with the monstrous strength of the watchers. He, as well as two other protectors, lunged towards Willem where he lay, and he threw himself down beside the unconscious form and began dragging him back. One of the unwieldy fat forms came lumbering up and began a charge with its thick cudgel. One of the men supporting Lawrence's rescue attempt fired his pistol to halt the monster's approach. The bullet only seemed to make its attention shift, and the Protector ran away towards the center of the room, prompting the Watcher to follow him menacingly. The Watcher's numbers began to dwindle, succumbing to the Protector's skill and number. But the Elder silently and ethereally stepped in and out of visibility, covering great distances as he did so right in the blink of an eye, using strange mastery of fire to scourge whatever came past him, Protector and Watcher alike. Lawrence scarcely knew his location, but would become aware of a large explosion or an infernal flash of orange light at different locations in the chamber. He bore witness to the mystical art of the Pthumerians, as he saw how two men screamed from the same manner of burnings that Willem had suffered. Maria charged at the Elder, leaping at him but fell for his cane trick. Vitus and German, however, had in the meantime dedicated all their attention to this ploy. Vitus saw how he vanished and immediately darted away to an unspecific point in the chamber. Impressively, he had predicted his movement, and the Elder appeared right in his sights. With a transformative swing with his cutter, he threw the Elder off balance. The staff swung around, tracing a fiery line in the air before it was brought down in furious might upon the stone floor. He pointed the tip towards Vitus, and wild flames erupted to claw after him. German rushed up behind him, taking the blade from the handle and began swiping at the billowing red mantle. The Elder staggered slightly and resorted to the cane tactic once more, but once again he was caught in his game. Maria stood at the ready, precisely where he appeared, and stabbed him in the back. As his blood spilled, and the last of the Watchers fell dead, he let out a loud grunt and plunged the staff into the ground. A large, bright fire erupted from the tip. The flames seemed indeed to bend fully to his wishes, and mimicked the form of a giant pick. He spun around, forcing everyone in his vicinity to create a distance, so as to not get enveloped in the sweeping traces of fire in the air. German leapt straight towards him and ducked the sweeping staff to cut at his form. The Elder tapped with the cane and appeared right behind him. The fire grew into an infernal spiked maze that shined blindingly bright. He swung it down right at him. German disappeared and would suddenly stand right by his side, having stepped right under the attack and slashed at his waist with the curved blade. The Elder disappeared once more with a tap of the cane, and German turned to try and spot him, but was caught in some lingering magic that had been planted by the maze where it impacted. It had started to seethe and exploded, to which he reacted just too late and was sent flying onto his back. The sinister Pthumerian slowly loomed over him. He prepared a wide swing, but just as he was about to commence, a shot from Maria's pistol fired into him. This completely interrupted his attack, and out of her foggy step, she appeared right between him and the Elder. She plunged both blades deep into the Elder's chest. With a powerful pull, she sent the towering figure falling to his back. In his dying breaths, the Elder groaned and pathetically reached after her, then collapsed. The sight captured Lawrence so much that he for a moment forgot about Willem breathing strained where he lay. "A doctor! A doctor now!" He was not alone in requesting one, as others replicated his pose by kneeling beside one of their own, requesting aid. Maria had managed to recover German from the scorching explosion, and he luckily seemed only to have been affected by sheer force. As the pale-garbed medics rushed in, Scanning for those in distress, Maria grabbed one and set for their position. Willem slowly opened one eye. His face was covered in burned tissue, and he closed it immediately from the pain. In addition, part of his arm and torso too had scorched wounds.
Is he alive?
Maria stumblingly approached, with German keeping pace while supported on her shoulder, to which Willem muttered something inaudible. They all released their stress in a sigh, and the doctor began applying salve to the burn.
This looks bad, Lawrence noted weakly.
I can't do anything for the left eye,
the woman informed as she pulled away some tissue from his face.
but the other is not completely destroyed.
A gathering nervously formed around the damaged provost, within an acceptable distance. Luna knelt down beside Lawrence.
Is he awake?
She carefully asked. He nodded, and Willem opened his right eye to look at them. Luna revealed an intricate vial with a red substance.
See, preserved blood. Plenty more back there.
Willem made an effort to smile at the realization. Lawrence lay a careful hand on his shoulder. Evolution without courage, Master Willem.